Hello, welcome fellow travelers. This is Moons in Minutes. Today we're talking about the moon Dione, or Princess Dione as I like to call it. It's a fun little nickname there. Princess Dione here, a moon of Saturn, was formerly known as a star of Louis. Why was it known by that name? Well, it turns out this guy Cassini, our boy Cassini, an astronomer, when he first discovered it, he called a series of moons, about I think 4 moons of Saturn, he called these 4 moons the stars of Louis. And he wasn't a very good naming kind of guy, so he didn't know what to name them, so he named after the King Louis, who he called himself, he was kind of a weirdo, but he called himself the Sun King, so whatever. But anyway, it was formerly known as that, but I call it Princess Dione for fun. As you can see, Dione here is the 15th largest moon in the solar system. It has a diameter of 697 miles. Another moon of Saturn, which we'll talk about on the channel here, is 20% the size of Titan. So Titan, of course, is another moon of Saturn, which we will definitely discuss, one of the famous moons of Saturn.
Oh yeah.
As I talked about, the discoverer of our girl Dione here was Cassini, all the way back in 1684. So Cassini discovered Dione, he discovered Tethys and Iapetus, and another one, 4 moons he discovered of Saturn. I don't remember the 4th one actually, but that's okay. So yeah, Cassini discovered this in 1684, legendary discovery. Why is it named Dione? Well, like I said, he initially named it the Star of Louis because he couldn't think of any other name. But eventually got renamed to a myth name, so it's named after a Titaness or daughter of Gaia and Uranus, if you want to laugh about it. So it's a Titaness is its myth name, and it's also a daughter, Gaia, Earth, and Uranus, god of the underworld, I believe. So kind of cool there. And one of the big boy facts I want to talk about Dione, which is really cool. Dione itself is not the most exciting moon, so it's basically a giant ice ball in space. We'll talk a little bit more of some of its cool details here about our girl Dione, the Titaness that she is. But its orbit is pretty crazy. I like to look at this. I believe Dione I think it's the 4th moon to orbit from Saturn, so it's about 4th out. But from Saturn, if you look at Saturn, the beautiful jewel of the solar system, the orbit of Dione, the orbit of Dione is 234,500 miles. So that's how far Dione orbits away from her mother Saturn, her beautiful mother. Now, our moon, Luna, as I like to call it, as many people call it nowadays, a popular pet name, but works for the moon as well. Our moon orbits 240,000 miles away. That's pretty crazy. They're almost orbiting the same distance away from their host planet, or the mother planet, as it's called. Now, Luna obviously orbits us, the moon. In the case of Dione, it orbits Saturn. But their distance is almost exactly the same. However, the days, if we look at the days that they take to go around their planet, in this case this is Dione here, this is our moon. It takes our moon about 29-ish days to go around the Earth. Like, that's technically a month. There's another term for it. But it's about 29-ish days. Around 30, our calendar is about 30 days. But it takes 30 days for the moon to go around. It takes Dione 2.7 days at about the same exact distance from its host planet. It only takes 2.7 days to go around Saturn, like this. It's zipping around Saturn, it's flying around. Why is that? That is pretty crazy. I looked up this fact and I was like, wow, that's just amazing that it's basically the same distance away. And yet it's basically a month for, if you were to track a month on Dione, it'd be 2.7 days. That's just insane. Why is that? Well, I'll tell you. That's why I'm here. So Saturn is 95 times the mass. So if we put over here, Saturn is 95x. 95 times the mass of the Earth. She's a massive girl, Saturn. but she's not very dense. We'll get into that in a second. But she has so much more stuff on her. Saturn is so massive that it is 95 times the mass of Earth. And now, as we know, with gravity, as we'll talk about more on the channel, but the relationship between mass and gravity is very instrumental into the force of gravity. So the more massive the object, the more gravity it exerts. And so in the case of Saturn here, it pulls with so much more mass. It is so much more massive than our little piddly Earth. No offense. We are here on Earth, but no offense to Earth. But it is so much more massive than Earth that it really pulls and yanks on all its moons. And in the case of Dione here, even though it's about the same distance away, it really slings that thing around. And so Dione's, as a consequence, excuse me, getting excited with all this science here. But as a consequence, Dione's month is super, super fast. Pretty amazing, pretty crazy, pretty cool, pretty epic. So fun fact about Dione, its month is 2.7 days. Okay, final point here about our lovely moon Dione. This is a really interesting factoid here I really wanted to share with you guys. Looking down here at the board over here, we have this fascinating phenomenon. Speaking of fun stuff with orbits, there's something called Lagrange points. What are Lagrange points? Well, this dude named Lagrange found out that within orbits, and this is true of any orbit, there are these Lagrange points. He found out that in any orbit, if you were to somehow sneak into an orbit of an object, you can kind of like glide in here. You can glide in and become like slide into an orbit. Let's say this is our orbit of Dione. Here's our lovely Saturn, as you can see, the jewel of the solar system. So we have Saturn here right in the middle. We have Dione's orbit going around. Within the orbit of Dione, there are two really tiny moons. So one other juicy bit of information I wanted to share with you guys. Saturn actually has 83 confirmed moons. That's crazy. So Saturn, our girl, has 83 moons. 3 of which are in the orbit of Dione. One of them being Dione. So Dione's a major moon of Saturn. It's large enough to be considered a major moon. But there's 2 minor moons called Helene and Polydeuces. These are very tiny moons. I don't know the size of them offhand. But they exist on Lagrange points. What are these points? Well, they're trapped in the orbit within Dione. So in the case of Helene, she actually is in front of Dione, and Polydeuces trails behind Dione. I don't know the exact points if that's where they exist on the orbit, so like Polydeuces might be actually more like right here. But the essential point that I want to make about Lagrange points is that some objects can get trapped in the orbit. And it's a fascinating feature of just orbits and celestial mechanics, how the movement of planets and different bodies, when they're moving and orbiting, that you can actually trap. There can actually be these very, very stable points on the orbit between Saturn, which is very massive, and Dione, which is not so massive. But because Dione has this very stable orbit, it's basically trapped these 2 moons on its own orbit. And so Helene and Polydeuces are in the same orbit field of Dione, going around the same path around Saturn. And so it's basically trapped within the orbit of Dione. Pretty crazy. So I wanted to share that idea of Lagrange points, that Dione itself has trapped these 2 other tiny moons of Saturn. She does have 83 of them. Come on, we only got the 1. Just don't want to count all the crazy NASA space debris we got out there. That's like artificial satellites, so we got plenty of other stuff out there. But pretty fascinating. I really want to share that Lagrange with you. I just thought it was so fascinating. And we have, the Earth itself also has Lagrange points. So, you know, any body that's going around another object in the solar system is going to have these points where it creates this weird stability where, because of the pull of Saturn, because of the pull of Dione, and the consistent, constant movement and flow and flux of these massive bodies, that there are these stable like anchor points almost, and they sneak in there and they go along for the ride. So that's what Helene and Polydeuces are doing. And that is all for our Princess Dione today. Pretty ice and mysterious, a lovely moon. It is lovely. We don't know how much we're going to explore of it. It's definitely a fascinating moon of its own accord. It is one of the many moons of our lovely Saturn. Hope you guys enjoyed that Moon in Minutes segment. Please like, comment, hit that sub sandwich button. Thank you. You know it's good for you. Peace out.